The smell reaches him before the sound, cordite and wet Dutch clay, and, 200 meters up the road, the copper tang of a burning half-track that had been his lead vehicle 40 minutes earlier. Sturmbannführer, no, Obersturmführer Karl-Heinz Reiniger, 27 years old, is kneeling behind the low brick wall of a ruined farmhouse south of the Nijmegen Bridge. His helmet has slid forward on his brow. His left glove is missing. In his right hand an unfired signal flare he cannot remember drawing. He can hear them, not their voices, their footsteps. They are not running, they are coming down the ditch line at a walk, and they are still coming. Reiniger would write it out later, in a report to his regimental staff that survives in composite form in the divisional history of the 9th Schutzstaffel Panzer Division, Hohenstaufen. The words are careful, the way a Kharkov veteran's words are careful. We were told the Americans jumped into battle by accident, that they were poorly led, that they would surrender when pressed. All three of these things were lies, and I discovered them within 30 minutes of first contact. In 4 months, from a Dutch orchard to a Belgian pinewood, the Schutzstaffel would try 3 times to break these men. 3 times they would fail, and each time more of them would die learning why. The Germans had a nickname for these Americans. It had come off the body of a dead officer at Anzio the winter before, a phrase copied out of his diary and passed up through intelligence channels until it reached the staffs of the Waffen-Schutzstaffel in Holland. Teufel in weiten Hosen, the devils in baggy pants. It meant the 82nd Airborne Division, the All-American, and by the autumn of 1944, no one on those staffs was laughing when they said it. What was it about these Americans that made ideological soldiers, men who had walked through the ruin of Russia and come out the other side, dread them above every other enemy they had ever met? That is the question this film will answer. It will not answer it yet. To understand the dread, you must first understand the confidence that came before it. By September of 1944, the Waffen-Schutzstaffel in the west had been reforged from the ruins of Normandy. The 2nd Schutzstaffel Panzer Corps, under Wilhelm Bittrich, had been pulled back to the country around Arnhem and Nijmegen, ostensibly to rest and refit around 2 divisions. The 9th Schutzstaffel Hohenstaufen and the 10th Schutzstaffel Frundsberg. These men were not decorative. They were the survivors of Kharkov, of Kursk, of the closing jaw of the Falaise pocket. They had held ground against Soviet tank armies with a fraction of the armor they needed. They had watched entire British battalions collapse under a single concentrated Panzer Grenadier assault, delivered at the correct point of the correct line, at the correct hour. They believed, and their belief was built on evidence they had gathered with their own hands, that the decisive blow at the Schwerpunkt, delivered by ideologically cohesive troops, trained past the point of ordinary endurance, could shatter any Allied line the enemy dared put in front of them. What little they knew of American paratroopers going into Operation Market Garden was thin and dismissive, that they had jumped into Sicily and made a mess of it, that they had dropped scattered across the Cotentin Peninsula on D-Day and taken heavy losses on the way down, that they were, in the words of one 9th Schutzstaffel staff officer paraphrased into a divisional situation report, sky troops, light infantry, no armor, no depth, and easy to isolate on the ground where they fell. The Schutzstaffel were confident. The Schutzstaffel were experienced. The Schutzstaffel were about to be wrong. On September 17, 1944, the American parachute regiments came down around Grosbeek and Grave. Within hours, the 82nd had the Grave Bridge intact and was pushing north through the flat-ditched country. A 9th Schutzstaffel reconnaissance patrol, moving south to probe the drop zone in strength, ran into a paratrooper outpost that by every rule of German experience should have been overrun in 20 minutes. 90 minutes later, the patrol had lost 11 men and had not moved forward 20 meters. You cannot break a line that does not know it is supposed to break. The Schutzstaffel command staffs in Arnhem heard the reports and did exactly what disciplined professionals do. They explained the anomaly. The paratroopers had been dug in already. The patrol had been too small. The reconnaissance officer was inexperienced and had pressed his men too eagerly. A fluke. On the body of a dead American on the edge of that first firefight, a Schutzstaffel grenadier found a small book, a pocket New Testament with a rifle bullet stopped somewhere inside the pages of Deuteronomy, and beside it a heavy fighting knife with the edge honed to a razor. The grenadier turned the book over in his hand, handed it to his sergeant, and did not want to speak of it again. The belief held, Bittrich's headquarters ordered a proper battalion-strength counter-thrust to clear the paratroopers from the Nijmegen approaches and reopen the highway to Arnhem before British armour could arrive. The right amount of force, applied at the right place, would end it. It always had. The denial spine begins here. Return now to the young man kneeling behind the ruined farmhouse wall, Obersturmführer Karl-Heinz Reiniger, from a village outside Regensburg, commander of a reinforced Panzer Grenadier Company in the 9th Schutzstaffel Hohenstaufen. Kharkov survivor, Iron Cross First Class, quietly Catholic in a way he had learned never to speak of, carrying inside his breast pocket a small enamel medal of St. Michael that his men did not know about and would not have approved of. His force on the morning of September 18 numbered roughly 240 men, 4 half-tracks, a pair of Sturmgeschütz 3 assault guns borrowed from the divisional escort, and a mortar section. His mission, briefed at first light, was to sweep the American paratroopers out of a stretch of orchard and farm ground south of the Nijmegen Highway Bridge, clearing the way for the armoured column that would follow later that day. His confident reason, written out to himself in the pocket notebook he kept, was tidy and professional. They are lightly armed, they have no anti-tank guns worth the name. They dropped last night, and they have not slept. I have 2 assault guns, and I have men who have done this before. He gave the order at 0740. He believed it would be over by noon. The advance began in a ground fog still lifting off the beet fields. Reiniger walked 100 meters behind his lead half-track, close enough to see the American positions when the fog opened. A fence line, a low farmhouse with a scorched south wall, the black spike of an orchard. First contact was a single M1 Garand shot from the orchard, then 12 more in a rolling pattern, aimed. The point squad of his lead platoon went down as if their strings had been cut, not sprayed. Chosen. The Sturmgeschütze fired high-explosive rounds into the tree line, and the tree line answered with a bazooka round that punched the frontal plate of the left assault gun and killed the loader before the crew could shout. A Browning automatic rifle opened up from a position his forward observer had not identified. Then another. Then a third. Reiniger's men went to ground behind a low earthen bank and could not lift their heads. He is shouting. He knows he is shouting. He cannot hear himself. A mortar round lands 20 meters ahead of him, and a Feldwebel he has known for 2 years is simply not there anymore. The Americans are not falling back. The Americans are counter-attacking. Down the ditch, at a walk, the smell of burnt cordite mixed with harvest sugar beet, the flat crack of Garand fire that never seemed to slow. One paratrooper stood in the open in his jump smock and threw grenades underhand into the half-track behind Reiniger, like a boy tossing apples across a fence. The half-track burned. The men inside did not come out. At the moment Reiniger had expected surrender, the paratroopers had come forward. It was a thing so contrary to his experience that his mind, briefly, refused to process it. He had attacked positions his entire war. He had never been attacked by the position he was attacking. By 11 o'clock, his company had ceased to exist as a maneuver unit. He pulled the survivors back to the farmhouse and counted. 67 dead in the beet field. Another 41 wounded who could not walk. 2 assault guns burning on the road. 1 half-track destroyed, another abandoned. His forward platoon reduced from 38 men to 9. The ratio came from his surviving Feldwebel, who walked the ground later under a flag of truce to recover the wounded. He counted 11 American paratroopers dead in the orchard and along the ditch. 11. For Reiniger's 67, roughly 1 American for every 6 of his own. At nightfall, in the farmhouse cellar, Reiniger wrote his after-action report by candlelight. The last line of it, in the composite version preserved through the 9th Schutzstaffel's regimental history, was quiet and terrible. The failure of this action was not, in my judgment, the fault of my company. It was in the assumption that we had been sent against ordinary infantry. We had not. A line that will not break is one thing. A line that walks toward you is another. The Obersturmführer had trained his career against the first. He had never in his life been asked to fight the second. He would survive Nijmegen. He would not survive the winter. What should have happened at Bittrich's headquarters when Reiniger's report was read aloud was a reassessment, a pause, a hard question about what kind of enemy had eaten a reinforced company in 90 minutes on flat, open ground. What did happen was different. The staff drew a red line under the exchange figure and concluded unanimously that Reiniger had lacked mass. A company was too small. The paratroopers were densely dug in around the orchard and needed to be crushed by weight, by armor and infantry combined, at battalion scale, with proper artillery preparation. The solution was not to reconsider the enemy. The solution was to send more. They studied the losses. They did not study the men who caused them. And on the evening of September 19, the order went out to the 10th Schutzstaffel Frundsberg. A full armoured battalion group, with grenadiers riding on the tanks, would retake the Nijmegen approaches and reopen the highway at dawn. Enter Sturmbannführer Otto Lindemann, 34 years old, 10th Schutzstaffel Panzer Regiment. In an earlier life, a gymnasium teacher of mathematics from Hanover, thin at the wrists, careful with his glasses, he drank 4 cups of coffee before dawn and could not sleep without a 5th after midnight, and he had made a private joke of it with the young adjutant who kept the pot on the stove. His father, a great war-felled Webel, had died of the influenza in 1919. Lindemann had commanded armour since Kursk. He had been wounded twice. He had never, in his own careful reckoning, lost a battalion action. His force numbered 15 Panzer IV tanks and 4 Panthers, 2 companies of Panzer Grenadiers, a battery of towed 88mm guns, and the confidence that came from having read Reiniger's report and drawn from it the wrong lesson. The Obersturmführer sent men where he should have sent tanks. Lindemann wrote in his tactical journal on the night of the 19th. That is his failure, and it will not be mine. The paratroopers have no armour. I have 20 tanks. We will drive through them by 9 o'clock and be across the bridge by noon. He shared this assessment with his adjutant, a young Untersturmführer named Bruck, over the 5th cup. Bruck said nothing. He had read the report too. September 20, 1944. Lindemann's Kampfgruppe rolled south from the highway bridge in a wedge, Panthers leading, grenadiers on the decks with their rifles held between their knees. The morning was bright, a hard, clear autumn light on the Dutch fields. Civilians in the villages later said the tanks had looked, going by, like a parade. Lindemann's doctrine held that armour unsupported by anti-tank guns cut through light infantry the way a knife cuts through paper. The paratroopers holding the road south of the bridge had no anti-tank guns worth the name. A scatter of bazookas, a captured Panzerfaust or 2, the single-tube 57mm gun the 82nd's glider troops had brought in with them. What Lindemann's doctrine did not tell him was what those men armed with those weapons would do with them. The lead Panther, halfway to the paratrooper line, took a bazooka round in the flank from a hedge less than 15 meters away. Not disabled, merely scarred. But the crew, unnerved, jerked the tank sideways and the second Panther bunched up behind it on the narrow road. From the ditches on both sides, paratroopers rose and threw. Grenades, satchel charges, the improvised gammon bombs the 82nd had learned to love in Italy. The lead Panther brewed up. The second's tracks were torn away from its road wheels in a shower of pins. The third traversed to shoot and took a 57mm round in the mantlet at 200 meters. It stopped. It did not move again. Lindemann is standing in his command half-track, radio at his ear, watching the parade come apart. A grenadier riding on the third tank is trying to jump off and cannot. His tunic caught on something, and a paratrooper walks up out of the ditch and shoots him at 10 paces without breaking stride. The paratrooper's face is streaked with mud, and he is chewing something. Gum, Lindemann realizes. He is chewing gum. The paratroopers were not defending the road. They were hunting the tanks. His armor was prey. His infantry was running. And upstream, at the Great Bridge itself, a rumor was beginning to reach him. American paratroopers in canvas assault boats, rowing across the Wall River in broad daylight, into the muzzles of his own machine guns, and coming out the other side still coming. That crossing, executed that afternoon by Major Julian Cook's 3rd Battalion of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, would take the northern approach of the bridge from behind. Half the boats did not make it. The men in the surviving half climbed the mud of the far bank, killed the machine gun crews at close range, and did not stop when they had done it. By late afternoon, Lindemann's camp group had been broken, 7 Panzer IV tanks and 2 Panthers destroyed or abandoned. Grenadier companies reduced to platoon strength. The composite kill ratio, delivered by Untersturmführer Bruck to divisional staff and later recorded in the Frundsberg's regimental history, was worse than Reiniger's. For every American paratrooper killed in the day's fighting, 8 of Lindemann's men had died, and none of the American losses had bought them a foot of ground back. Lindemann survived the day. He would not survive the war. He would be killed near Cleves in February of the following year. But that evening, in a farmhouse outside Bemmel, he wrote a private note in his tactical journal that would become, in the composite reading of the regimental record, the closing testimony of the second wave. I sent tanks against men in canvas boats and men in ditches, and my tanks came back burning while their men came back walking. I do not know what this means. I know it must not be said aloud. You cannot outweigh men who have already agreed on the cost. The dread now carried the weight of twice. 2 defeats should have ended the assumption. They did not. The Schutzstaffelstaffs pulled back from the Nijmegen debacle, absorbed the loss of the Frundsberg's armor, absorbed the loss of the bridge, and, with a discipline that was at once impressive and terrible, filed the paratroopers away as a peculiar problem of the September fighting. Not a category error, a local difficulty of terrain and timing. When Hitler's winter offensive was planned for the Ardennes in December, the American 82nd Airborne was not the reason the northern shoulder of the salient became the battlefield it became. But when the paratroopers arrived by truck at Werbermont on the night of December 18, hauled forward as the theatre reserve, the Schutzstaffel command in the sector reacted with the same conclusion they had drawn twice already. Send more. Send the best. This time, with the winter weather grounding Allied air power, with fresh panzer divisions, with the strategic weight of the whole offensive behind them, this time it would be decisive. The senior skeptic wore the black-collar tabs of a Standartenführer, Wilhelm Rausch, 46 years old, of the 1st Schutzstaffel Panzer Corps' northern axis, Kampfgruppe commander with a reinforced Panzer Grenadier Regiment, an armored battalion, and priority claim on Tiger II tanks from the Corps' assault battalion from Munich, twice wounded, the second time at Kursk, a fragment still lodged near his spine that troubled him when the cold came down. He wrote long letters to his 18-year-old daughter, Anna, and did not send them because the war had made him a man who no longer believed his own reassurances. The letters accumulated in an oilcloth wrapper in his kit. He would sit by lamplight after the day's orders were signed and add to them one careful paragraph at a time, and then fold the paper away. Nijmegen was fought on ground that favored them. Rauch wrote in the operations diary of his Kampfgruppe on the night of December 20, bridges, ditches, water. Here the country is open. Here I have tigers. Here they are exhausted men rushed forward without their heavy weapons. Reiniger did not have enough. Lindemann did not have the ground. I have both. Reading Reiniger's after-action report that same evening, alone in the farmhouse he had made his command post, Rauch underlined one sentence twice. They did not know they were supposed to break. He closed the file quickly, as if the words might climb out of the paper. December 21 through 23, 1944. The northern shoulder of the Bulge, Trois Ponts and Vielsalm, the pine woods and the river bends along the Salm and the Amblev. Rauch's Kampfgruppe attacked in 3 axes, tigers leading, grenadiers on foot in the deep snow, artillery walking the wood line ahead of them. It was the largest coordinated assault of the 3 waves, and it was meant to be decisive. The 82nd's response, under Major General James Gavin, was not to hold in the classical sense. It was to fight forward, to bleed the enemy at every farmhouse, to sell each stone wall for what the Schutzstaffel could not afford. The 504th and the 505th and the 508th Parachute Infantry regiments were thinly spread across a front no book would have called defensible. They defended it anyway. A tiger clears the wood line at Chenot. It is 30 meters from the American positions. A paratrooper of the 504th is on top of it before its gunner can traverse. He drops a white phosphorus grenade down the commander's hatch. The tank lights. It does not stop moving for another 40 meters. Nothing inside it is screaming, because nothing inside it is alive. Another tiger comes on. Another paratrooper is running. The smell of white phosphorus and pine. The crump of tiger main guns firing into farmhouses the paratroopers had already emptied. The cold that froze wounded men to the ground in 20 minutes if they could not be dragged out. Rauch's grenadiers stopping in the open because they had seen too many of their friends killed by a rifle fired from a place no rifle should have been. The final shock for Rauch was not the loss of the tanks. It was that he watched his own men break first. A grenadier company from his Kampfgruppe, ordered forward across a clearing at Trois Ponts, refused. Not mutinied, refused. The company commander, a young Obersturmführer, looked at his Standartenführer through the open door of the command half-track, said nothing, and shook his head. Rauch let him. He did not know, at that moment, that he was letting the assumption die. By Christmas Eve, his Kampfgruppe had lost 31 tanks and armored vehicles, more than 1,000 men killed or missing, and had not moved the northern shoulder more than 3 kilometers. The kill ratio, taken from Rauch's own tally in one of the unsent letters, folded here into the regimental record, was worse than either predecessor's. For every American paratrooper his Kampfgruppe had brought down, 10 of his own had gone into the snow. 10. He would survive the battle. He would be captured on the west bank of the Rhine in March 1945, and in his kit the Americans would find the bundle of letters, none of them opened at the field post, the last of which would end this story. After Trois Ponts, the Standartenführer stopped writing operational orders that assumed the paratroopers would yield ground. He began writing orders that assumed they would not. You cannot defeat men who have already priced their own deaths and paid the invoice in advance. The dread, at full weight, remained unresolved. Let the guns fall quiet for a moment now. Let the story slow. There is one American we have not yet named, and he belongs at the center of the coldest morning of the coldest month of the war. Sergeant Daniel Vukovic, known to his squad as Danny, 23 years old, F Company, 2nd Battalion, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division. From Youngstown, Ohio, his father had worked the open hearth furnaces at the Republic Steel plant on the east side of the river, and had come home smelling of iron and slag every night of Danny's childhood. The summer Danny turned 15, his father had put a small brass boat compass in his hand, the kind a river captain might use, and told him he wanted the boy to know which way was north when he was in a place where nothing else made sense. Danny had jumped into Sicily at 18. He had jumped into Normandy at 22. He had fought at Sainte-Mère-Église in the dark hours after his stick had scattered. He had held the causeway. He had walked out of Holland in October, still holding the compass. On the night of December 20, he was in the back of a truck bouncing east through Belgium, and the compass in his breast pocket was pointing at a pine wood where a Schutzstaffel Kampfgruppe with Tiger tanks was getting ready to come through. It is 0420 on the morning of December 22. Danny Vukovic is in a shallow foxhole at the eastern edge of a farmhouse yard outside Basse-Bordeaux, and the snow is coming down in a way that eats every sound except the ones very close and very loud. He has been awake for 31 hours. He is not tired anymore. He is somewhere past tired, in the place where the body simply keeps working because it has been told to. His squad, 9 men when they came off the trucks, 7 men now, is arranged around the farmhouse in a rough horseshoe. He has walked the perimeter twice in the last hour. He knows where each man is by the sound of his breathing. A Feldwebel who might see them and say they are asleep at their posts would be wrong. They are listening. At 0426, a Tiger's engine starts up on the road 200 meters east. Danny hears it. He does not move. He touches the compass in his breast pocket without looking down. He whistles once, low, and the 7 men around him lift their weapons without a word. The Tiger comes down the road slowly. Grenadiers walk beside it, boots crunching through the crust of the snow. Danny lets the tank pass. Lets it. Because his orders were to let the armor through and take the infantry, and orders in the 82nd were things you obeyed even when the thing you were letting past was a 60-ton monster 10 meters from your head. The grenadiers come level with the farmhouse. Danny lifts his Thompson. He does not shout. He does not need to. The 7 men fire at the same moment because they have practiced this until it is the same as breathing. The grenadier column folds in the snow. Danny steps out of the foxhole then. Deliberate. Unhurried. He walks, at a walk, toward the wounded tank commander who has climbed halfway out of his hatch 100 meters up the road and is fumbling with a sidearm in gloves he cannot feel. Lying in the ditch on the far side of the road, playing dead, was an 18-year-old Schutzstaffel grenadier named Peter Voss. He had come across the border with his replacement draft 9 days earlier. He had never seen combat until that morning. He was captured at first light, when the American medics working the ditch line found him breathing under a dead man. Voss, in his interrogation later that week, composite testimony folded into a post-war divisional history, said this: "I watched the American sergeant walk toward our tank as if he were walking to fetch bread. He did not run, he did not crouch. He walked. Our commander shot at him with a pistol from the hatch and missed, and the American shot back once and did not miss. I understood then that we had been sent to fight men who had already decided what they were willing to lose, and I understood that we had not. The dread made flesh. The line held." March of 1945, west bank of the Rhine, near Wesel. Standartenführer Wilhelm Rausch was captured by American infantry when the pocket around his camp group collapsed under artillery he could not answer. In his personal kit, folded into an oilcloth wrapping tied with tarred string, was a bundle of 11 letters addressed to his daughter Anna in Munich. None had been sent. The last was dated February 3, 1945. The composite reading of that letter, framed here as a captured document rendered through the divisional history, is the film's final reckoning. It is not a confession of respect. It is the clear-eyed testimony of a man who understood, at last, that he had never been going to win. He wrote the numbers out. Reiniger's ratio, 1 American paratrooper for every 6 of his men. Lindemann's, 1 for 8. His own, 1 for 10. And he wrote to Anna that the numbers had gotten worse each time he tried, and that when a man's numbers got worse each time he tried, it was not because his enemy was getting better. It was because his enemy had always been this, and he had refused to see. "The Americans I fought were not braver than my men," Rausch wrote, in the ordinary meaning of that word. They were something worse. They were men who did not need to be told a second time. They knew before they landed what they had come to spend, and they spent it without arithmetic, and that is how they defeated the arithmetic that I lived by. Why they could never win. Answer the question the film opened with. Answer it directly, so a listener who cared only for this paragraph could carry it away. It was not any one thing. It was not the M1 Garand, though the Garand was a better rifle for the fight than the Carabiner 98K. It was not the bazooka, Though the bazooka killed tanks the doctrine had said were safe. It was not the American artillery, though the American guns fell on the Schutzstaffel with a weight the Schutzstaffel had never learned to answer. It was the whole of them, and the whole of them was a philosophy the Schutzstaffel had encountered nowhere else on the map. These Americans had been trained to a standard that treated the individual soldier as a decision-maker, not a rifle holder. They had been taught to counterattack when doctrine said, fall back. They had been taught to handle their own casualties as a price already agreed. They had jumped 3 times in 18 months into places they were not supposed to survive, and they had survived, and each survival had told them a thing about themselves that no Schutzstaffel training film could unteach. They were, in the end, what the Waffen-Schutzstaffel had built itself to be, and had not become. Rausch spent 2 years in American captivity and returned to a Munich that no longer existed to a daughter who was no longer 18. He never spoke publicly of the letters. They were returned to him in 1947, and he burned all of them except the last one, which was found among his papers when he passed away in 1971. Reiniger, as we said, did not survive the winter. He was killed by American artillery near Bastogne on January 5, 1945, in an action his regimental history describes in 3 sentences. Lindemann was killed near Cleves in February, in a wood outside a farm whose name is not recorded. The 82nd Airborne finished the war on the Elbe. They took the surrender of an entire German army, 150,000 men. In the first days of May, Sergeant Danny Vukovic walked home to Youngstown in the fall of 1945 and never spoke much of any of it. He kept the compass. There is a meaning to draw from all of it, and the film owes it to say so plainly. The Schutzstaffel had believed that shock and discipline and ideological cohesion would beat any enemy, given the right mass at the right point of the line. They had built themselves around that belief. They had been, by any honest reckoning, magnificent at the thing they had built themselves to be. The paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne Division beat them anyway, not because the Americans were braver in any sense that could be printed on a poster, not because they were more ferocious, not because they loved their cause more, whatever that would mean. The Americans beat them because they had built a different thing, and the different thing was better. The dread the Schutzstaffel felt, Reiniger and Lindemann and Rausch and Voss, and the 1,000 other names not written down, was the dread of a soldier who meets an enemy that has priced his own death and paid the price in advance, and who has therefore removed from the fight the one weapon the Schutzstaffel had counted on most. The moment the other side realizes it is losing, that moment never came at Nijmegen. It never came in the pine woods above Trois Ponts. It was not withheld. It did not exist. The men in the baggy pants had not been trained to notice it. You cannot break a line whose men have decided the price of the ground before you arrived. You can only pay to try. From Rausch's last letter, the one he never sent, the one that survived the fire because his daughter found it in a drawer after he was gone, read plain. Stopped clean. Anna, I fought the devils in baggy pants 3 times. I lost 3 times. I understand now that I would have lost a 4th.